from the cooperative, and they split it in 3 portions. One goes to the workers as a bonus, one goes back to the co-op to improve the facilities, and the other third goes to the entire community. They've now got free housing, free universities, free hospitals, and they've got their bank where they put their funds to set up other co-ops. So you can go there and go, oh, I've got an idea to build electrical bicycles, or whatever it might be. And they will have a team of people that will research your topic, look at it, and if they see it's viable, they'll give you the money. No interest, and you can set up your co-op and you can start another entire business. And this thing is just flourishing. And these co-ops are going all over the world, but we're not hearing about them. So I'll get on to my notes here. Oh yeah, thanks. To quote our illustrious leader, Malcolm Turnbull, we all know it, he has been saying, "There's never been a more exciting time to be an Australian." Well, I agree with that. It is exciting, but it's not exciting because there's opportunities of jobs, there's opportunities of industry, there's opportunities to stop suicide and homelessness. It's exciting because we're entering a very, very perilous time. We have governments around the world which are unaccountable. They're accountable to a cabal of secret elite. They have billions and billions of dollars to swing countries. They control the media. As we know, we've got Murdoch in Australia controls 70%, and it's looking to increase the way things are going. So it is exciting, but not for the reasons that Malcolm Turnbull is trying to portray. As I say, we have the highest levels of depression and suicide amongst our community. Homelessness is going through the roof. Our land and resources are being bought up by foreigners, mostly with black money, and a government which is further and further trending towards what I would call fascism. Extinctions are going through the roof as well. We've got mammals especially heading towards extinction. But it's not because of CO2, carbon dioxide, it's because of forests. We're destroying our forests. We're chopping down forests, using them to make electricity of all things, and we are losing our koalas are about to go extinct, they're suggesting. Our platypus have largely been extinct. I used to trap platypus for national parks and wildlife in the Kosciuszko Mountain National Park when I was young. We found a 90% plummet in populations. Why? Because of erosion. What was happening in, Packers resorts? All the soil's getting washed into the river, putting about a metre or 2 of soil on top of the gravel, and the platypus couldn't get down to the benthic organisms to eat it. So they die of starvation. We gave this information to national parks. What do? Their government? Nothing. So we're not in control of our society. Instead, it is the corporations. I've been very fortunate to spend a lot of time in Melanesia on what I call the periphery of globalisation, the last remnants of societies which, for all intensive purposes, are more or less Stone Age. They live in small, tiny, anarchic communities. They have their own language, their own governance, their own culture. And it's very much what our last speaker was advocating, a bottom-up system of governance. There's no government, no top-down system in their society at all. They sit around in circles, women's circles, men's circles. They discuss things together. They come up with a solution. That's in Solomon Islands. Giving is their value. Their system of preeminence, of status, is how much you can give, how much you can help and support your other members of your community. And they treat it with great esteem. Someone who is a giver that can give more is looked to as a leader, as someone to refer to for advice and knowledge. They work by a system of mutual aid. They shun wealth. If people go away and work in town and come back and they've got lots of money, people are jealous. I'll return to that later, but now I'll move on to to our current political system. Governments today are invariably run by merchant bankers, lawyers and accountants. Our own Prime Minister is exceedingly wealthy and I believe has abandoned the common good to serve the corporate elite. Trickle-down economics is still sprouted, although even the Liberals are aware that it rings hollow. While the patriots can participate in the farce of elections, regardless of who wins, the interests of central banks and corporations are held far above those of the community. And a point I might make is during the last election, I don't know if anybody noticed, but come day 2 of counting, there was a 2-day gap where they had a break. That's all they do. The Australian Electoral Commission lives for one election every 4 years. And in the middle of the 4 or 5 days of counting, they had 2 days off. Doesn't that tell you something is going wrong? I don't trust our government. I don't trust the AEC at all. Only in the face of mass civil unrest or an upcoming election would they consider a reversal in their policies. How do we get there? Well, as previous speakers have mentioned, I believe it all went wrong with the Lima Agreement and the pursuit of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. It accelerated under Paul Keating and it was worshipped by John Howard and seamlessly pursued by every subsequent government, regardless of their persuasion. Protective tariffs were reduced and cheap imports flooded our markets in the disguise, or the guise, I should say, of a so-called level playing field. More recently, this is manifested in free trade agreements, a term of doublespeak, if ever I've heard one. As WikiLeaks has revealed, these secretive trade agreements include an investor-state dispute settlement clause allowing foreign corporations to sue governments anytime a change in policy harms or even threatens to harm their profits, irrespective of being deemed constitutional by the High Court. Free trade agreements thus put the interests of corporations above those of our elected leaders. What's the ramifications? Economic, social and environmental. Well, Australia is, I would say, the most fortunate country in the world. We have more resources than any other country. We have the jackpot, primary resources, oil, gas, iron ore, coal, gold, timber, fishing, etc. They're in abundance, more so than anywhere, but once they're gone forever. They are finite. Secondary industries, manufacturing, are the driver of a healthy and sustainable economy, providing work, income, taxation, government services. Manufacturing in Australia, as we know, was abundant prior to the removal of tariffs. The abolition of tariffs caused economic and social decline as manufacturers were forced to either go bankrupt or take their industry, their manufacturing offshore. To where? To the lowest common denominator. So began the race to the bottom. Our factories closed, destroying our economy, with compounding government debt as corporate and employees' taxation dwindles, mass unemployment fills the dole office, and our social evolution makes a U-turn with increasing inequality, poverty, homelessness, depression, and suicide. Our government's response was to borrow money, creating even increased debt, to lower wages, to demonise and destroy unions, attack the unemployed, and falsify the data, such as unemployment numbers. Concurrently, of course, the shift of the global industries to countries such as Indonesia, a military dictatorship, only fuels those economies, fuels their corruption, their despotism, their militarisation, and causes the social dislocation of communities as village lands are stolen by the elites to make way for rampant and uncontrolled industrialisation. Those who try to oppose are threatened, incarcerated, and often murdered. So too in Australia began the sell-off of public utilities and assets to the corporate elite. These assets, as a previous speaker mentioned, were taken. They were provided by our forefathers and foremothers, many generations it took to acquire, and with the stroke of a pen without a mandate from the community. The Commonwealth Bank of Australia, as mentioned, that was sold by Keating for less than $10 billion, and it now makes that yearly as an annual profit. With corporate deregulation, corporations move their head office overseas, placing to places of low or zero taxation such as the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Switzerland and Panama. I remember in '87 speaking to a director of a large Australian mining company who was boasting to me how he'd set up companies all around the world in tax havens to minimise tax and save the company millions of dollars. But what is it? It's just with paper. It's just shifting pieces of paper, and they are denying the Australian public, the Australian country, billions of dollars now in lost revenue and taxation. In a recent ABC News story, journalist Stephen Long reported how the big four accounting firms in Australia have been branded aggressive, unethical and accused of, and I quote, perpetrating the greatest tax crimes in history. The four big accounting firms. On a conservative estimate, at least $50 billion in tax revenue is lost yearly in Australia as a result of these tax minimisation schemes. Who audit the books of nearly half the world's major corporations. Half the world's major corporations use these four accounting firms. According to George Vanni, you may have seen him, he spoke a few months ago, he had over 30 years experience in this industry. And I quote, they work with government to deliver what they want to their clients. Work with government. So he's saying they collude with our government to deliver what the corporations want. Our government is therefore complicit in perpetrating the greatest tax crime in history. They no longer work for us, they work for transnational corporations. A few weeks ago, I took the opportunity to speak to two senior accountants from one of these big four regarding tax minimisation. Their first piece of advice was to set up the parent company in a tax haven with a subsidiary here in Australia. This, they explained, would avoid capital gains tax and reduce Australian tax to zero, as you can sell your produce to your parent company at a loss and they can on-sell at a high profit and pay no tax in their tax haven. So it's well known. It's being done by all big corporations across Australia. The only ones who pay tax in this country are the workers. And they quoted me $15,000 to set this up. $15,000 to set up a company in the Cayman Islands, Australia, Switzerland, Luxembourg, where you want. They've got their reps there doing the books. Everything's taken care of. And they also suggested setting up a discretionary trust. That is a trust, so all your assets, your companies are in that trust. Nobody can find out who's in the trust, who the names are, what the assets are, how much money you've got. And as we saw exposed, I think it was last year, Malcolm Turnbull has his money hidden in the Cayman Islands, which come out of the Panama Papers. In earlier years, such an admission would have resulted in his resignation. But today, in this era, he just shrugs it off and says, oh, it's business. Another example is Chevron Australia. They paid $248 in income tax, despite earning a profit of $1.73 billion. Mining giant Glencore in the Northern Territory, McArthur River. Recently, in Northern Territory, what have I got here? Oh, sorry, paid zero royalties on its McArthur River mine. This, I would suggest, is happening right across Australia. And The Guardian reported that Australia is set to become the world's largest exporter, as I think John mentioned, of LNG, where we are forecast to export 100 billion cubic metres of LNG per year. Qatar, selling the same quantity, receives 26.6 billion, while we receive 800 million. That's 26.6 billion and 800 to Australia. $25.8 billion we're missing out on, which could be going to help our unemployed, our pensioners, the environment, Aboriginal communities, hospitals, infrastructure and the like. Extrapolate this, that's just the gas, LNG, but extrapolate that across our coal, our iron ore, and all of our other industries, and the corporations using these tax havens by the big four accounting firms. And I suggest we are missing out on something in the vicinity of $200 billion a year. Yeah. We should be living more. We should be living like kings, so to speak. You see the Saudi Arabians, no one works. We have more resources than any other country in the world. And yet, as John Howard has done, and all the other leaders, so-called leaders, they are selling our resources to their mates, to themselves. You can bet your life they've all got shares in Chevron, shares in BHP, shares in the gas companies and so forth. That's where they're transferring the money. They are transferring our wealth to themselves and their corporate cabal of elites. I call this treason. Just imagine if we had 3 years of $200 billion a year, we'd be out of debt in 2.5 years. We'd have no homelessness. Education would be free, universities would be free, public housing would be abundant. We would be living in a very, very good world. And it's all possible.
Rex Connor, that's why he wanted to buy shares in the company, so as we're going to look at the books.
Who's that?
Rex Connor.
Ah.
He wanted to buy shares in those companies, and that's when the loan affair came up.
Ah, okay.
But there he is there, the Assistant Commissioner of Tax. That was 28th of October 1996, stating multinationals have paid no tax or little tax since 1953. That same year, 7,000 companies claimed international status. I didn't bring the ABS figures, but that year 87% of all tax collected was from the PAYE and 9% from corporate Australia, but 90% of corporate Australia was owned by the multinationals. I worked for a company in the coal mining, Clutha Development, owned by a man called Daniel Ludwig. He never paid 1 cent of tax here. He paid $30 million for the mines of the Burragoring Valley. The mine I worked in made $50 million. So what did the rest make? All out of the joint. What you're saying is correct.
Yeah, it's... Sorry. Yeah, we need a massive change, and we need to get rid, I think, of these political parties which are governed by people behind closed doors. And from what I understand, you can't even join them if you want to. Now, one other bit here was the Badgerys Creek I was going to mention. Malcolm Turnbull, again, has said we're going to build the Badgerys Creek for a cost of $5 to $6 billion, but as soon as it's built, we're going to sell it. And I quote, he says, "There's no doubt that private finance will be interested, will be falling over each other to get their hands on this public asset. Falling over each other. It's that profitable. So why the hell would you sell it?"
Wagner's built one for it in 18 months up in Queensland.
Right. Out of time? Australia's sovereignty is in peril. We're giving away our resources and public assets. Consecutive governments actually facilitate the foreign takeover of our prime lands, holdings, housing. Recent reports have half of Western Australia's freehold land is now in foreign hands. This treasonous cabal controlling our country is now working with their proteges around the world, in particular those in the communist dictatorship of China. These moguls are snapping up our assets, farms and housing stock as quickly as possible and recruiting ex-politicians to facilitate the process. Former Premier Bob Carr and ex-Trade Minister Andrew Robb are good examples of the bipartisan support the Chinese communist dictatorship currently enjoys. With multi-million-dollar donations to each party to lubricate the process, they enjoy virtually no opposition from our representatives. They've bought up essential services. You know all about it. Cubby Station, historic buildings. One outfit's just bought 40,000 hectares, one company, 40,000 hectares in Victoria and New South Wales alone. Their latest acquisition, as you might have read, is a huge tract of land between Brisbane and the Gold Coast. They're going to build an entire new city. Figures released from FOI, Freedom of Information, acquired by the Daily Telegraph, disclosed that 11% of all housing property is now bought by foreign nationals, and foreigners are pricing Australians out of the market. We have been warned. Anson Chan, Hong Kong's Chief Secretary from 1993 to 2001, visited Australia recently and reported to Peter Harcher of the Sydney Morning Herald. She warned. She says they will try to buy off political candidates and politicians too, with cash and other inducements. It's standard. And Chan's final words were, by the time China's infiltration of Australia is really apparent, it will be too late. And as we know, they've been already caught hacking into our intelligence services. China is a communist dictatorship. It practices corruption, murder, false imprisonment, torture, the harvesting of human organs from political prisoners, forceful removal of people from their homelands, and the infiltration of the Communist Party into every facet of our society. This is what we have built up by cutting down our tariffs. We have built up the monster. Rather than advancing human values of equality, it's pulled our system down as well. Who are our political elites? Well, I've did a bit of a search and, for example, a lot of them are associated with very ultra-right-wing groups. Erika Betts' uncle, Carla Betts, was a member of Hitler's Gestapo, and John Howard's father is reportedly to have been a member of Australian fascist New Guard. And let's not forget that fascism was applauded way before my time, but in 1938 Hitler was named Man of the Year. As a consequence of the New World Order, we are witnessing the rapid erosion of human rights around the globe, and no more less than here in Australia. The new system of police laws is described as one ABC journalist as draconian laws, designed to protect or terrify us, depending on your perspective. Now I will just return briefly to utopia and tell you what's happening on the periphery of this centralised modern capitalist system. Just 200 k's north of our shores, the situation here is horrifying. According to reports from Yale University and University of Sydney, where I worked, it is a system of slow-motion genocide. Like East Timor previously, the atrocities being committed by Indonesian police and military forces are largely hidden from the public under a self-imposed corporate media blackout. Let me briefly go through the facts. 61, it was a Dutch colony getting ready for independence. On the 1st of December 1961, they even had their New Guinea Council, an elected New Guinea Council, their Morning Star flag, their national anthem, and they promulgated to the world, we are going to be called West Papua. Then America stepped in, because they knew from 1936, from an American geologist, that the world's biggest gold deposit was in that ground. On behalf of the Rockefellers, then came the USA on behalf of the Rockefellers, who were in pursuit of the world's biggest gold deposit, which I estimate would have been or is worth $500 billion in today's money. The Dutch were coerced, we don't know why, but they were coerced to transfer the territory to the UN, and the UN transferred it to Indonesia. It's been an ongoing system of genocide since then, documented. 500,000 people have been murdered, a transmigration program that has made the indigenous people a minority in their own land, women sterilised by doctors when they go to get checkups without their knowledge, pigs and blankets infected with tuberculosis handed out to villagers to wipe them out, massacres by the Indonesian military on local villages, rampant and nearly daily torture on students and activists. And as reported by Michael Batchelard of the Sydney Morning Herald, who did a fantastic investigative piece, he uncovered a systematic system of taking children as young as 5 from their families on military aircraft to be locked in religious schools in Java and indoctrinated into Islam, to then be returned back to West Papua and continue the process. While the Indonesians are the frontline perpetrators of this systematic genocide, Article 3 of the United Nations Convention on Genocide states that active complicity in genocide is also a crime. Here we find the global elites involved. 1 Indonesia couldn't do it by itself. Australia, we trained the military up in Darwin, the elite Kompassus, the most hated, feared people in Indonesia. Even outside of West Papua and East Timor, you cannot drive past a military establishment without slowing down to 10 kilometres an hour, or they'll shoot you. And our Australian Federal Police train the treacherous Detachment 88. The USA, Switzerland, Germany, United Kingdom, many others supply the weapons and the hardware. Malcolm Turnbull, George Brandis, Julie Bishop and the rest of our leaders are therefore complicit because we train, aid and abet that program of systematic genocide. So not only are they treasonous in our country, destroying our economy, destroying our fabric, our way of life, they are also killing and murdering and impacting and part of this global system. So to finish off, we need a revolution. It may or may not involve guns, but we need a new system of governance. We need independence. If we're going to go through the normal channels, we need to start creating systems and groups of independence, because people, I live in a little community up in Bellingen between here and Brisbane. Everyone is fed up with Labor, with Liberals, even the Greens. It's a green area. We've got a new Green Council and they don't give a damn about public concerns and opinions. So I'll leave you with the remarks from Jefferson and Einstein at the end. The world is only run by bad people because good people do nothing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Julian King. Evil thrives when good people do nothing. Well, we're here tonight, that's a beginning. Now, you've heard 4 speakers, all memorable, all different, all in the finest traditions of the Roundtable Forum. We have had speakers, topics over the last 11 and a half years, God in politics, multiculturalism, Australian democracy, terrorism and the death of democracy, politics and the police, peak oil, the Mayan calendar, the internet, the future of the left, Western civilization, is it doomed, the Euro, the Arab Spring, Agenda 21, cyber warfare, is Australia committing suicide, truth in history, the sellout of Australia, death of democracy, gods and demons, the need to believe, that was an interesting one, the cashless society, and will our alliances protect us, that was the last one. Now the next one, on the 8th of August, and I hope you can all make it, won't be in this palatial room, this lovely room that we all regard as a second home by now. It'll be in the Macquarie Room, 8th of August. Topic will be something you can't afford to ignore, fake news. I repeat, fake news on the 8th of August, 6 o'clock, Tuesday the 8th, in the Macquarie Room. You will be informed, but take one of these, put it in your diary. I'm now going to invite questions to our panel. Now, when you want to ask a question, you just put your hand up. I will acknowledge you. I'm very fair-minded, I'm very democratic and Argus-eyed, so I won't miss you, but only one question per person. And come up to the microphone or you won't be recorded on our imperishable video. We'd like you to be recorded. Specify which speaker you want to ask your question to, which speaker, and you can't ask the whole panel or we'll be here till midnight. Yes. Who are you directing your question to?
Peter Spencer.
Peter Spencer. Off you go.
Just a question for Peter Spencer about trial by jury. Pauline Hanson was found guilty by a jury. I know for a fact David Ettrich, as he was defending himself, did his best to select out of the jury people he thought would be pre-biased, and Pauline Hanson was actually found guilty by a jury. How do you you explain that?
What was your name again? I'm sorry.
Bob Whittaker.
Bob. Thank you, Bob, for the question. It's very easily explained. I don't even have to look at the structure, but I can assure you that the jury was concocted. It wasn't run the way juries were run. It wasn't structured the way a jury should be structured. It has to be a jury of peers, and they run the trial, not the judge. And they have the ability to prove both the law and the facts. And the elites, the aristocracy of today, are terrified that juries will control our society under common law. And that's what it's there for, to protect us against the elite. But they put these little juries in and claim we have a jury, but in fact it does not constitute what a jury means. Just one, if I may. I just want to ask John, do you agree with what I'm commenting, John?
100%.
You see, it's not good enough to say you've got a jury. It's just like saying I've got a car. If it has no wheels and no engine, it's not much bloody good to you. The jury has to be structured the way it was designed to structure so it can function. And it functions to protect us and all our institutions. It stands between we the people and those who would like to see themselves as the new aristocracy. So in Paul Ian Hanson's position, I would say the jury was not a jury at all. It was nothing more than a puppet window dressing.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, who's next on the block? Who's next? Such a modest audience, I don't see a single hand. Yes. Who are you directing your question to? Peter again. Peter, you're on deck. Come on, stand up to the microphone and speak into the mic, otherwise you won't be recorded.
Peter, would you say our
into the mic, Squire.
would you say our problems are spiritual?
Oh, please don't do this to me. Listen, let me tell you something, and I'm not a preacher. People have often said to me, Peter, you spoke at this particular event, or you gave an eulogy, which was just so unbelievable. I recall my daughter, my eldest daughter, has got 4 children. Her brother-in-law just passed away. He was 34. And we're on Skype regularly. Her and Jessie, her husband, go to church on Sundays and are very, very passionate about their attending their little church. They were quite distraught, couldn't quite work this out. He passed away very quickly, no forward warning of illness. I heard them, I felt them, I then turned and said, what do you go to church for? Don't you attend your church in the Christian faith to celebrate the death of the Son of God, who died to give you all eternal life? They've just given your brother-in-law eternal life. Rejoice. So yes, to answer your question, everything comes under God. And I have believed that, and believe it so intensely. I walk each day absolutely full of joy in that fact, even though I still hurt, even though I'm still passionate, even though I still suffer. I said to somebody, Philip Adams on the ABC said, all these people who think there's a God out there, they're crazy. Well, next to the gate of my farm, there was an antheap about 2 feet high. I happened to know that one day the old elder ant said to the young ant, yes, that's Lord Peter, he's a god. And the little ant said, what do you mean? He said, come with me. Down, down, down he went in this antheap. And he came right to the bottom floor, through that roof. And he came to this massive library. And he potted around the shelf. And he went back 300 generations. Pulled the book out. Opened the page. Look. It says right there. Peter came through that gate at 8 o'clock in the morning 200 generations ago. He must be a god. Look how many generations of ants have passed, and he's still coming through the gate. So my answer to Philip Adams is this. The universe is a big place. And if you haven't been to every corner of it, don't tell me God isn't there.
Now we'll have a third question